What is up, guys? My name is David Lee and I'm Asian with Hat, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about starter guns. So I've had a lot of questions in the past about what gun should I buy as a starter gun, and there's a whole multitude of answers to that. In my opinion, it just depends on how much money you got, and I'm just mainly talking about rifles, starter rifles particularly. So this doesn't really have to do, or I'm going to tell you guys, if you have the money, then go with something that that you really are particularly invested into, especially by the name or the reputation, whatever tickles your fancy. But I'm going to tell you some things that I've discovered, I would say in the last 5 years, that I've learned. And we're not really going to talk about building guns. That's a whole nother subject. But I'll tell you right now, if you want to build a gun, if you really want to build a gun, at least consider having a built rifle first from the factory before you start considering building a gun as your first gun. I just don't recommend it to friends because there's a lot of things you're going to make mistakes on, and you're not going to understand what happens. But being the fact that I'm not saying I'm a well-seasoned veteran in the firearms community, but I would definitely say I'm decently versed. I'm a firearms enthusiast, in my opinion, when it comes to it, and I would say I have somewhat of an idea of how to articulate some of the things that go on the firearms. It required a lot of mistakes to happen for me to actually learn and understand that there are going to be a lot of mistakes down the road. I mean, there were a lot of mistakes that I had to make for me to get to where I've learned from there. But that being said, some firearms that you would want to start with, you know, again, we'll probably go to the top end, you know, at least from here. We'll just mention quickly, you know, you could buy a CAC SR15, but you know, this is a very expensive setup. Like for a full build, this is actually an LMT lower with an SR15 upper on it, and I want to say this is $2,200. And then we'll go to the bottom and then go from there. So if you do want to buy a starter gun, I would say, you know, for those of you guys that are airsofters, I have a lot of people that are in airsoft that do ask me what's a good firearm to start with. Or firearm brand to start with. I would personally say if you are still in the category of, you know, about $500 to $600, consider Palmetto State Armory or Aero Precision. Those are two brands that always come to my mind that have a decent amount of quality control compared to some of the lower end brands, and I just don't recommend the lower end brands. There's a lot of lower end brands. Hell, there's been a brand that was in Oklahoma for a while, and all they did was just produce specific parts. The problem was that they had an extreme amount of quality control issues, and they are now closed. And that's, I would personally say that's the unfortunate curse when it comes to some of the firearms manufacturers in Oklahoma. There aren't really a lot of good firearms manufacturers in Oklahoma, and if they are, they're very few and far in between. Most of them tend to close, you know, within the first 5 years. And I think there's one still in Oklahoma City that is still around. And I want to say there's two, but I want to say the two that's in Tulsa, they're not firearms manufacturers, they just produce parts. But the one that was in Oklahoma City closed down back in December, and we don't really know why, truthfully. I don't really know why, truthfully. There's a couple people that work there, and no one really knows the true answer to it. But moving on from there, talking about Palmetto State Armory and Aero, you know, yes, there's always going to be, you know, quality control issues. They're pushing out more parts or more guns. More things can go wrong than, you know, saying so if you were to buy a Knight's Armament. That being said, there's always going to be, you know, those a couple squeaky wheels when it comes to the Knights. There's always going to be a lot of squeaky wheels when it comes to PSA. But I would definitely say, you know, as long as it's built right, I would say this is something I would use. Now, that being said, I've used this out to 600 yards, no problem. It took a little bit to learn my holdover more than anything, but outside of that, I've been able to shoot 600 yards with this setup. Now, that being said, if you do have concerns for quality control issues, you know, take it to a gunsmith. There's no problem with taking it to a gunsmith to see if there are some things that could be addressed. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have the proper tools and you don't have the proper education to build an AR-15, why are you trying to touch it? That's just my opinion. You know, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learned my mistakes, and I tried to actually tell a lot of friends, you know, some of the mistakes I've made in the past. Some things I would definitely say, some things that you'll definitely see on some other brands out there. the castle nuts sometimes don't get staked properly, or they don't get staked at all. Some other things is that the buffer tube may walk out. Another example is like LMT, and I love LMT, but there's a couple hiccups here and there. There was one where, like on an LMT manufacturer's strip lower, the detent hole wasn't even done. So that's just something to mention. And that's just another example of like a high-end manufacturer where the QC was not there for some reason. But on Palmetto, is it possible that QC could not happen? Yeah. Now that being said, I don't have a lot of experience with Aero, but I definitely say that there are people out there that would vouch for Aero and would say that their builds are pretty good. But I would also mention, consider just getting a little bit of a QC check on your side when you receive it, and send it to a gunsmith, or take it to your gunsmith, your local gunsmith, and see if there's any qualms. Check the torque on the barrel nut. Check the torque on here. Check if there's any flaws on here. But most of the time, there shouldn't be an issue. If there's an issue, sorry, but contact the manufacturer. They should be able to address it as soon as possible. I want to say Palmetto is actually renowned, I would say renowned, but Palmetto is actually known for actually having a really good warranty process. I want to say Grantham is a good example. He had some concerns, called up customer service, they took care of it as soon as possible. That's what I recall. Anyways, some other things to consider. If you're up in the range of $800 to $1,000, there's nothing wrong with going with modern Colt or even BCM. Now that being said, this Colt upper has a Palmetto State lower, so this whole I'm not saying the whole build, but the upper and lower combo setup I would say is about $800 if I recall right. And then you have the red dot over here, that's about $150. That's a hollow sun, and then I have an ergo extended rail on the front side post. 6920 pin and welded. I'm sorry, 6921 pin and welded. To achieve the overall length of 16 inches for the barrel. But this is something I've used in the past. I'm still having fun with this. I actually like it, and I would definitely recommend it to friends. Now, there's gonna be a lot of detractors when it comes to modern Colt, just because they got acquired by CZ. Well, I'd hope that, with CZ, that they actually tried to take care of some of the concerns that were with Colt and why they lost some of their reputation next to, some of the popular other manufacturers. But when it came to Colt, when it comes to modern Colt, a lot of the parts that they have on here, they mainly assemble it in-house. They don't produce it in-house anymore. So the barrel over here is not Colt. It's something that's been outsourced. The receiver's been outsourced. They don't produce anything in-house anymore. Now, I think, if I haven't mentioned already, BCM is another good option, but BCM's hard to come by, mainly because there's a lot of demand for it. But to mention, to backtrack to talk about Colt, this is I would say this is what would be considered a real Colt rifle. And I say real Colt in relevance to the fact that this is actually a made-in-house Colt, barrel made-in-house Colt upper receiver. Sarah Forge cut by Colt, manufactured by Colt, excuse me. But there's a lot of things that can be said about a classic Colt versus a modern Colt. Everything I shoot, every time I shoot with this, I love it. I love shooting with this setup, not just because it's a Block 2, but I would definitely say a modern Colt, I would personally say it doesn't compare to this classic Colt from, I would say probably 2012-ish, 2010-ish Colt. Back when they were, again, producing barrels. This has been confirmed to be a made-in-house Colt along with the receiver. But it just, some of the things that are made by Colt back then, were actually still being used by the military. Not that I'm saying that there's not used today, but it's something to consider. Now, if you were to look at something that is in the $1,500 range to $1,700 range, I don't have it here, but you could also consider a Geisley or I want to say Sons of Liberty Gunworks. Now those two, they have two different contrasting things about them. Sons of Liberty Gunworks we'll talk about in a second, but when it comes to Geisley, they have quite a bit of a reputation, and their barrels are pretty phenomenal. I have a buddy of mine that has had his Geisley for like the last year and a half, and he adores it, and he loves it so much that he bought another Geisley. So there's something to be said about that. The barrels are fantastic, like I said. Everyone loves the reputation behind Geisley, aside from Bendy Boy status, but that's a whole nother subject to talk about. Now, talking about Sons of Liberty Gunworks. Sons of Liberty Gunworks has a phenomenal warranty. They also have some really nice designs. They do a lot of collaborations with guys, Lee, Dead Air, and all that. I would say that they are probably, in my opinion, probably one of the most fantastic manufacturers out there in that category, especially when with what they stand behind. Not saying that, you know, there's other brands out there that are not, but, you know, there's something that could be said about their marketing. And the CEO is willing to put out his phone number to, you know, for technical support if you're having some issues with their guns. And then on top of it, they have a fantastic warranty when it comes to their barrel. If I recall correctly, and don't quote me, is that if the barrel is shot out, they'll replace the barrel for you. Now, I don't know if that's changed, but that's something that I've recalled every year that I hear about it from the CEO himself. Now, another brand that I consider, if on the high end, two brands specifically, would be Knights Armament Company and Lewis Machine & Tool. Now, Lewis Machine & Tool, there's a lot of jokes about Lewis Machine & Tool. Personally, I like the lowers. There's also some things to be considered. You know, they do produce a lot of things, and there's going to be a tendency for quality control issues. Some things that I've seen once in a while, and I think I've already mentioned it, is the detent hole that was for the buffer tube. But other than that, there's been some. There isn't really anything that I would say is wrong with LMT in my opinion, but I'm pretty sure there's gonna be a lot of people coming down in the comments saying that LMT is just as good. Well, you know, I like LMT. And I'm considering a Mars H in the future, or if I don't choose an SR25. I own two CAC SR15 uppers, and they're both on LMT lowers. This is an 11.5, and then this is a 16-inch. And one thing I like about both is that they have a phenomenal bolt carrier group. For an example, this is a Lewis Machine & Tool, not a Colt, not a CAC, but there's been a lot of revisions. I would say revisions, but there was a lot of notoriousness when it comes to the AR-15 bolt carrier group. The bolt itself can break. Well, talking on Colt, it takes a lot to actually break them, just because they improved the design of the bolt carrier group for for their AR-15s or their SR-15s, excuse me. But when it comes to like standard bolts over here, you know, there is a wear cycle at about 15,000 rounds that you have to consider switching out. Cycling out your bolt itself for a new bolt, because once you start hitting 15,000 rounds, you really need to consider it or it'll break. Lewis Machine Tool had a solution for it, and they tried to do a couple things on here. We'll talk about this in another video. Something I mentioned on Colt, they have really good bolt carrier groups where they try to round out they rounded out the bolt face to where it doesn't have as much possibilities of fracturing. Another one is the cam pin hole, and then the cam pin hole has been reduced in size, so the cam pin is smaller, but because the cam pin hole is smaller, there's more material to add on there, so therefore the cam pin hole can't fracture as easily on compared to like a classic bolt. Now, another thing to say about it, when it comes to their barrels are fantastic. I mean, someone has shot, there's been a report out there where they shot about 20,000 rounds and the grouping has never opened up, and that's fantastic. Another thing to mention on there, he shot about 20,000 rounds, no issues at all when it came to the bolt. And that's something to be said when it comes to like CAC. And would I buy another CAC? Absolutely. Right now I'm settled on two SR15s. Again, next option I might look into is probably a 308, you know, Knights Armament SR25. If I don't choose an SR25, I'll probably buy an LMT Mars H, just so that way I can actually switch out barrels a lot more easily. But you know, that's not here nor there. There's definitely some pros and cons to both that I have to look at and consider. But that being said, I really do like Knights, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone that actually has the money. But to briefly mention again, if you are on the budget end, consider a PSA or an Arrow. If you're in the mid-tier end, consider Colt, BCM. If you're above mid-tier, consider Geisley or Sons of Liberty Gunworks. And if you're wanting to consider, and you have all the money in the world, consider a CAC or an LMT. And that's pretty much my opinion. So my name's David Lee, and I'm Asian with Hat. If you guys like the video, hit the like button. If you guys dislike the video, hit the dislike button twice. Subscribe if you haven't already. All right, we'll see you guys in the next video.